Every day, thousands of people fall victim to hackers. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 things that you and I can start doing today to avoid getting hacked. So let's start with number 1, and that deals with passwords. We all use passwords. We use passwords for like social media and banking and shopping, etc. But the problem is, if we use the same password across all those sites, if the password is stolen on any one of those sites, that password then can be used on the other sites, and boom, that leads to trouble. Another challenge with passwords is a weak password, something that's easy to guess or break. The solution, my friend, is using a password manager. And using a password manager is like having a giant lock that's really hard to break. And we're going to use that lock to keep all of our other passwords secure. A password manager can also help us make sure that we have unique passwords across all the sites and places we visit. And there are several really good password managers. And so if you have one that you really enjoy or you like or you think is super effective, hey, leave a comment below. Let everybody know. So let's move on to tip number 2. What happens if our password is stolen or compromised and taken from a site that we visit? The challenge there is, even if it's a really good password, if the hacker has that password, then they can go ahead and potentially log in as us. And a great logical question is, how exactly could a hacker, steal a password? And there's several different ways, but let me show you one quick and easy way that hackers can do exactly that. So one technique for harvesting or stealing a user's password is for the hacker to create a site that looks identical to this one, trick the user either through an email attack or some other method to going to what they think is the real website, putting in their username and password, and boom, those credentials have just now been collected by the attacker. And let me demonstrate how easy that might be to set up. So I'm going to use a little distribution of Linux. Now also, in preparation for this, I just want you to be aware that you should never, ever, ever try to hack or compromise other people's systems. And so this is my own server I have here set up in my office, and this is just for demonstration and educational purposes only. Please don't use this for anything bad. So here on this tool called Kali Linux, if we go to the menu system and we go down here to social engineering tools, there is an option here for a social engineering toolkit, which I'll launch. And this social engineering toolkit is menu driven. So option 1 is for social engineering attacks. And then option number 2 is website attack vectors. And number 3 is credential harvesting attack method. Credentials is a fancy way of saying usernames and passwords. So I'll put in 3. So here I'm going to choose option number 2, and I'm going to go ahead and clone a website. Again, on the internet, you'd never want to clone somebody else's site that you don't have authority to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and clone my existing website here on my server in my studio, and I'm not cloning a real server on the internet. However, an attacker may do exactly that. So I'm specifying the login page for the website that I want to clone. I'll press enter, and then the attacker, through a phishing attack that's like a fake email with a link in it or sending a link through some other mechanism, if the attacker can trick the user to going to the cloned website instead of their own, then when the user puts in their username and password, the attacker has now collected it. So in this window, I'm going to the IP address of the attack machine here in my lab environment, which is .28. I'll go ahead and press enter, and let's compare. The window up here is the real website interface, and the one down here is on the attacker machine. So my password is super secret with capital S's, and then exclamation mark 12345, and then I'll click login. So behind the scenes, what happened is that information was just collected by the attacker. It also redirected the user to the actual real website. So then the user would think, oh, something went wrong. They'd try to log in again. Then this time it'd be successful because they're at the real site. So even with a good passphrase or a good password, it's possible that the user could be tricked or the site could be compromised. And it's really not a question of if a password could ever be compromised or stolen. It's really a question of when. So how do we protect ourselves against that? And the answer, my friend, is 2-factor authentication. So the concept is 2-factor authentication. Sometimes it's shown as multi-factor authentication. And I've also seen it abbreviated as 2FA for 2-factor authentication. It means that instead of just requiring something that the user knows, for example, a password. So there is one of our 2 factors, and the second factor is often something that the user has. For example, if they're doing banking, it's very likely they have a physical card with either a chip or a magnetic stripe, and that could be used as a second factor. Or in the case of logging into a website, we could require the user's password as one of the factors. That would be something the user knows, and something the user has could be like a one-time code. They're quite often 6 characters. And when that user logs in, that one-time password is presented real-time or near real-time to that user. So that could be presented via email, or it could be a text to their phone, or there could be hardware like a little number generator, or software like a little application that generates the code. And all that would be set up at the time you set up two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So any site that's important to you, if you set up two-factor or multi-factor authentication, then even if the attacker compromises your password and steals your password, they won't be able to get that number on demand unless they've also compromised your email or your phone for text. And that's why out of these options, a device like a software one-time password generator like Google Authenticator are often a great idea. And oftentimes that little code that's generated, that one-time password, it can be referred to as a token. So for two-factor authentication, if we're requiring the user when they log in to supply their password and the token that's been generated real-time for them, then the attacker who's just stolen the password still will not be able to log in. How else could we be vulnerable to a hacker? And the answer to that is the hacker could reach out to us directly. They use impersonation, they use fear, they use a sense of urgency when they reach out to us. And the various methods they could reach out to us would include things like email, social media, any kind of messaging system, and they could even physically show up at our place of business or at our work. And an example of that, my son many years ago moved up north. And during his trip, it took like 12 hours, his grandfather got a call. Here's what they said. They said, your grandson was in an accident and he needs some money. So that's an example of a vishing attack, where it was an inbound communication from some unknown party in an attempt to compromise that person or get something from them that is not in their best interest. So what is the solution to inbound contacts that we didn't initiate? The answer is don't respond. Just kindly terminate the call and then contact that company in the official channel. Do not respond in the same channel if somebody's coming at you, whether it's email, messaging, texting, etc. Oh, and if you're wondering what my dad did when he got the call about his grandson, my dad said, you should call his parents. Click. He's pretty savvy for a 90-year-old. So next is tip number 4, and that is free Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi can be a great thing, like airports, coffee shops, etc. But my question is, if there's free Wi-Fi and we're going to connect to it, how do we know it's free Wi-Fi from the organization or the entity that claims it's the free Wi-Fi? And here's an example. I've got this little tool called NetSpot that's looking at all the Wi-Fi signals within range of this computer. And one of them here is called LAS_free_Wi-Fi. And so it has a pretty strong signal, and it's using the 5 gigahertz range. Everything looks good. So if a person was at the airport, for example, and there was a sign that said, hey, log into our free Wi-Fi, it's called LAS_free_Wi-Fi, how do we really know if this is being provided by the airport or is being provided by a hacker? Because all a hacker needs to create what's called an evil twin, that's a Wi-Fi network that looks like the real one, would be a computer or even a very small computer like a Raspberry Pi. And then any traffic that goes through that Wi-Fi network can be inspected and analyzed by the attacker. So the question might be, how do we prevent this? How? And there's 2 possible solutions for this problem. One is just do not use the Wi-Fi network, which is like telling a fish not to swim in water. And then second is to use a VPN, a virtual private network. There's lots of great vendors out there. If you have a personal favorite for VPNs, a personal VPN that you can run on your mobile device, hey, make a comment down below. Let other people know. And also, I'd be interested in how easy is it to use. And that leads us to tip number 5 in protecting ourselves against hackers, and that is sharing. We like to share on social media, like where we are, what we're doing. However, that's a bad idea. If you are traveling, go ahead and post those pictures and all that wonderful stuff that you did after you get back. Don't give enough information for an attacker to know that, hey, you're gone, or you're away, or you're going to be here, or you're going to be there, because that gives more opportunity to be compromised. And if the attacker or hacker was waiting for an opportunity where we'd be away from our normal computer and so forth, that could be the trigger for them to attack. Another example of sharing too much would be, for example, an online quiz that's meant to be fun and exciting. And it may ask like a whole bunch of questions, but maybe some of those questions include, where did you grow up? What was your favorite pet when you were growing up? Or what was your first pet? Or what school did you go to? All that information should not be shared anywhere because it might be used as part of password recovery or security questions on one or more sites. Anytime that we're asked for information or we have the opportunity to share information, we want to pause and say, maybe not. In fact, most of the time, don't do it. Just don't share it. And that way we're not putting that information out there. So every day, thousands of people fall victim to hackers. By following these 5 tips, you, my friend, don't have to be one of them.